And really what I think Libero infused into that effort was the rider-led organizing element, right? That this couldn't just be about the transit agencies and the transit worker unions, it had to be about the transit riders. And so just super grateful to have had Libero's partnership. Tomorrow he starts a new role at the Drug Policy Alliance, but the role we are most grateful to have Libero in is as a board member of the Riders Alliance, where he brings that smart, savvy strategy that keeps us moving forward in our values and in our power. And he's someone who, every time we talk, I said, wish I had like a life recorder that was like taking notes on the wisdom that Libero had shared. So I'm just really glad that you all get to hear 15 minutes of what Libero has to share with us, and we'll listen and learn, and I think Derek's finally recording it, so all my dreams have come true. Libero!
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, first of all, Betsy's too modest. I'm from the Riders Alliance, the executive director of the Riders Alliance. Well, I first of all want to just thank Riders Alliance for having me here and for having this event. You know, bringing together all these folks. You know, the past 3 years, we've done so much work through Zoom cameras and on phones, and it's just great to have people in a space together to build a sense of who Riders Alliance is as a body and to have an impact on that. So I'm just thrilled to be here. I also want to give special thanks to Caitlin and Myra for inviting me, and glad to meet everybody that I met today so far. So I've been asked, I'm Libero della Piana, as was said. I'm so great to be on the board of Riders Alliance. I'm a lifelong bus rider. Yes, let's hear it for bus riders. You know, I did not grow up in New York City. I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. You know, which is known as a big transit metropolis, right? No. Everyone I knew growing up, every family had a car, except ours. We didn't have a car. And so we rode the bus, the UTA, Utah Transit Authority. And the bus was terrible. It was late, it got, delayed. Sometimes it would skip your stop while you were standing there waiting for the bus, but the bus was essential. It was the thing that allowed us to function, to get to work, to get to school, to go on weekends for recreation. I love the bus. Bus riders, I would fall asleep on the back of the bus. And the bus driver would wake me up when we would get to my stop because he knew where I got off. The bus was my life. And so living here in New York City for the past 20 plus years, New York is in some ways just amazing because we have this amazing transit system that is the rival of transit systems all over the world, and it is the envy of cities all over North America, and yet it is also a mess and a disaster. And this is where we live, is in this weird tension between we have the most amazing transit system in the country, and we have a transit system that doesn't live up to its potential. And so we can't dump on the transit system and feed the idea that it's terrible, it's a mess, it's crime-ridden, it's horrible, because that doesn't push us in the right direction, right? We have to also say, we have to aspire to what it could be, right? To lean into the positives and aspire to the transit system that we deserve, that our communities deserve and need. And that is where Riders Alliance comes in, right? We don't want to just be like petty grievances, right, which feed this idea transit is not good. We want to be aspirational, to talk about what it could be, its failings to overcome, etc. So that's really what I'm here to talk about for the next few minutes. I was asked to talk about creating meaningful social change. And it's obvious that you all know how to do that already, right? You guys have been winning fair fares. You've been winning to fight for the federal funds to help through COVID that saved the transit system. I remember phone calls where there was serious discussion about like what would a 40% cut in public transit in New York City look like? You know, what would shut down of whole lines look like? That didn't happen. Riders Alliance and transit advocates and riders all over the country fought and won billions of dollars, $69 billion in funds that saved transit in this country. So you guys already know 6-minute transit was such a brilliant campaign. You guys know what it means to make meaningful social change. But let me talk about a couple of observations. One is that transit can seem mundane and small, except we always have to remember that transit is essential and transformative, right? Transit impacts every other social issue we deal with. It impacts healthcare, housing, education, recreation. It impacts all of these things. It impacts the environment, the climate. And so we have to avoid the temptation to fixate on small things in transit, which is where people start. They complain, there's trash in the bus bench, there's not enough cleaning on this train. We have to take those things and blow them up and really think about what is the bigger picture that we're talking about. So yes, transit can seem small and mundane, but we have to always lean into the fact that transit is transformative. So, Danny gave an example. What was the woman's name? Stephanie Graham? No. What? The woman who was Jennings Graham, who was removed from the Third Avenue line. Yeah. And when you think about that, when you look at Rosa Parks, when you look at the Montgomery bus boycott, when you look at the Freedom Riders, we know that transit has always been about the ability to move. Who is able to go where and for what? And so there's a reason why, one of the most awful and destructive Supreme Court cases in our history was about transit, right? It basically said that there's no rights for black people in this country. You have no right to ride in this car. And that, it took almost 100 years to overturn that decision. And we look at these civil rights fights where people transformed what was possible through public transit. So we have to lean into that. The other thing is that we have to realize that transit is at the crossroads of climate change and racial justice, right? That we cannot have the sustainable world we want without a robust and fully invested transit system. And we have to make that a part of the future that we're building. Here I have the name of Elizabeth Jennings Graham. I just had to flip the page. So that's why transit is important, and we have to always kind of remember that. Sometimes we get fixated on the small details. We think about the serial numbers on the train cars, and we can obsess about all these kind of data, but we have to lean into the transformational nature of transit. The other thing is we have to remind ourselves, and I got to go and listen to all your breakout sessions today, and you all were amazing, talking about power analysis, strategy, talking about equity and access. We always have to remember some of these principles of organizing and lean into organizing. When we talk about what makes for meaningful and sustainable social change, organizing is at its core. So what do we mean by organizing? It means that people impacted by the issue have to be the lead, right? Everyday riders, people who are impacted by this issue, have to be the biggest voice, have to make decisions about the direction and the demands, and have to be the base of our power, right? Two, we have to be rooted in building power. You know, when we think about what's possible, we often think about speaking truth to power, right? It's like we know what is right, and we just have to get them to understand what's right. But that's not how social change happens. Social change happens because we have the power to force the change that we want, right? So in order to do that, we have to build a lot more power. You know, in the root of the word power is the root of the word potential, right? It's the same word, just like in Spanish, right? Poder is to be able to, and poder is power, right? It's the same word. So when we think about what is the potential power of a writers' organization in New York City, how big is that? How many people ride every day? Where's Danny? It's like 8 million rides a day.
He said 11 million.
Yeah, well, 11 million is the MTA. But like just New York City, subway, I think is 8 million.
Yeah.
So we're talking millions of New Yorkers. That is the potential power of this movement, of this organization. And we have to figure out how do we get there. So we have to both do incremental growth of power through this organization, and we also have to do huge kind of dynamic growth of power. How do we mobilize a much bigger group? This is where I want to show my video. Okay, that's a small protest, right? No, this was over 1 million people in Chile in 2019. They're singing the song by Victor Jara, The Right to Live in Peace, right? And what the people turned out, 1 million plus people turned out, singing in unison, protesting income inequality. 1% of the people in Chile controlled 33% of the wealth. It led to a transformation, a new constitution, which has had challenges since. But this was a massive social movement. This is not one organization, right? This was a social movement that made huge transformational changes. Do you know where that movement began?
Subway high.
Yes, a 4-cent increase in transit fares. 4 cents. And this is what I want you to think about too, is that to make meaningful, impactful social change, we have to think as social movements, not just as organizations. We have to build this organization in a way that is a social movement activator, a catalyst that can turn a small increase in fares into a transformational movement that taps into anger and also the vision. It wasn't just anger, right? It was also a vision of a new world. And that's another key piece of organizing, right? The biggest changes happen when we have social movements. Two other quick things, and I'm getting close on time. One is that we have to use the power of riders and their allies to make the change we want, but one of our goals has to be to shift power. Downstairs, Theo was talking, we were talking about who controls the MTA and who makes the decisions. Do riders have a vote on the board? No, they don't, right? They're non-voting representatives of riders and other community groups. Well, why?
Good question.
The only reason why is because we don't yet have the power to make them put a vote on the board. So yes, we should fight for increased fares. We should fight for 6-minute service. We should fight for buses all over this city. But we should also think about who controls the MTA. For instance, well, why doesn't the mayor get to actually place seats on that board? It's just a recommendation. Why don't riders have permanent seats on that board? Why isn't there more input from the grassroots? So we have to build power to make changes, but we don't want just incremental changes. We want to shift power. So, because why is it that riders always have to go and beg? Why is it? Why? Because it's set up that way. Lastly, we want to build a bigger we, right? And I think that Riders Alliance needs to think about unexpected and unusual allies as it builds power. Where are the churches? Where are the social service agencies? We talk about the transit union, but what about the New York State Nurses Association? What about 1199? What about this is the biggest union city in the country. All those public service workers, all those other workers, how many of them depend on transit every day? The majority of them, right? We know that to be true. And so that is a constituency. So in organizing, we talk about building a bigger we. Because what happens is we think about our issues in silos. It's like, oh, let's go find all the transit people. And we bring them in the room. And then we go, gosh, why don't we have enough power? Well, because there's 6 million transit people in this city. So how do we get to them? How many people here are a member of a union? Not that many, right? Well, we got to figure out, how do we get those folks who are members of 1199, who are members of AFSCME, who are members of TW, how do we get them in the room? And what do we do as organizers to do that? I know I said lastly, but as Betsy said, I was doing this work at the national level the past few years. And one of the things that we don't think about in New York City is the fact that New York City is such a big piece of the transit pie. We're such a huge percentage of all transit rides in the country. We're such a huge percentage of the transit money that we're seen as being just a New York issue. Transit is a New York issue. That is a political nightmare for us. We cannot solve the problems of the New York City transit here in New York City. We need a national approach to transit, both for funding, for direction, all those things. And that means the Riders Alliance is a national leader. How many groups were so excited to hear about 6-minute service? People were like, how do we replicate that? That's an amazing campaign. So Riders Alliance needs to continue to be a national leader to the growing transit justice movement and inspire places like Salt Lake City, Utah, and Middle Tennessee, and rural Washington, because without them, we won't be prepared for this fight that's coming to reauthorize transportation funding in just a few years in Washington. Because that is where we're going to be able to put forward a vision, that a social movement to really transform transportation in the city, to give people the public transit they need. So, thank you. Keep doing the work you do. And I'll be there as a member. And I love you guys.